Welcome. We will start off with our Pledge of Allegiance. Here's our flag over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And next we have our land acknowledgement.
As we gather for this meeting, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We wish to acknowledge this land on which this SPC meeting is taking place. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Hohokam, the Akimel O'odham, and most recently, the Salt River Pima Indian community. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many indigenous people from across Maricopa, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land.
Thank you, Lulu. All right, so our agenda for this morning, we have 15 minutes with Dr. Menzel for any questions that you have. And then our topic is school safety. So we have 3 SUSD members with us today. We have James Dorr, he is the Chief Security Officer for the district. And then we have Shannon Cron, the Director of Support Services, as well as Melissa Sakos, an SUSD's Assistant Superintendent. And we have our Executive Board updates, some updates from our committees, and then time for any SBC representatives to make an announcement about their school. So with that, we will get to Dr. Menzel. Okay, I only have 1 card in here, so perfect.
That's better than last month.
I know. Well, I've got backups. Don't worry. That's not happening again. So, and then we can probably just pass the microphone around too if you have one that you don't want to write down. So first up, what is the plan of action for the influx of worrisome behaviors on campuses?
I think a lot of that's going to get addressed in the upcoming presentation. It is, in fact, a challenge not only here but across the country in terms of student behavior. Talking to colleagues, this is unlike anything anyone has ever seen. The adjustment coming back to school, the impact of the pandemic, which has been differential depending on family situation, community, all the rest. And so we do have positive behavioral support systems that we're working on supporting and expanding. And I think Shannon and Dr. Sakos will be prepared to talk more specifically about some of those strategies. But it's an ongoing concern and something that we're aware of and working on actively.
Okay, thank you. Is there any official policy on how to handle the hate word? Yes. I know, sorry.
Thank you. So we're getting different reports from different school parents who are Black, that their children are being called the N-word in school. And it's horrifying, but how the principals or assistant principals are addressing it. In one case recently, the child who was called that obviously retaliated and was suspended as well. And the parents were tasked with coming up with talking points on how to address it, and I just felt that was wrong. And so we started doing some digging to find out how is this really being addressed, especially now that we have more children coming into our community who are of other cultures, other religions, and other languages. So I just wanted to see what the proper channels are.
Well, thank you for the question. First, one of our core values is one of inclusion, and we believe that every student needs to feel a sense of belonging when they come to our schools, regardless of any particular social identity that they have. So when we have incidents of racism, what you just identified, there would be a process in terms of bullying and other things that would go through the administrative channels. I think it's also important to make sure that we're providing the support for our building level leadership and teachers to be cognizant of what might be overt acts, saying that specifically to someone, that's pretty clear cut and a concern. There are also other things that happen that are underneath the surface, often referred to as microaggressions. So building capacity within the system to ensure that every student is respected for who they are, regardless of those racial and ethnic demographics, their socioeconomic demographics. None of those should result in them being treated any differently or less than. And so knowing about it is the first thing, going through filing a bullying report. And we do work very hard, and Shannon can talk about some of the training that's been done, but we do work on restorative practices in this district. So oftentimes, our students are behaving in a way that they learned outside of school. And so helping them to understand the impact of their words and make right the wrong that was done is an important part of the learning process and something that we want to build into our cultural norms and values.
Is there a separate category for the use of that specific word? Or does it just fall under bullying? Because I think it's such a charged word that it's very expected to see some sort of response.
Right. So I have to look at the specific board policy. So I don't want to conflate what was my board policy back in Michigan and here. Yeah, bullying and harassment, and so sometimes there are categories broken out underneath that, but I'd have to look and see.
Okay, any other questions?
So if you have an IEP and you want to enroll at an SUSD school and you don't want to enroll at your home school, are you treated differently than someone without an IEP? Does that make sense?
So Dr. Guerin's got the answer to that. It's an open enrollment question combined with special education, so it's a nuanced response.
Yes, it is a nuanced response. Good morning, and it's a great question. So when any student enrolls, we need to make sure we have the programs, services, and capacity to serve that student. So, for example, if a student needs a speech services, for example, and our speech teacher at a certain school is already at capacity, and we would then have to hire another teacher to service that student, then the open enrollment sometimes, unfortunately, is denied. Not only is it's difficult to post new positions and be fiscally responsible, but it's also impossible to find teachers. So we work very hard to approve all open enrollment requests, but what we don't want to do is not provide the robust, high expectation services that a student needs. So we do have to have a different process to make sure that we have all the specialized teachers to meet those. We also don't have every program at every school. So it is nuanced, but we really strive to provide parents and families with their first choice.
Other questions? I had one, so I wasn't able to watch the board meeting last night. I know on the agenda they had potential changes to the public comment portion. What was the result of the meeting?
A 3-2 vote that adopted the draft language that was in the board packet, so you can see the specific changes. Thumbnail version is that public comment will be at least 30 minutes during regular meeting. That public comment will be limited to topics within the jurisdiction of the governing board, and that there is a process for prioritizing individuals wishing to speak to agenda items. So let's say you had 30 people who wanted to provide public comment. When you fill out the comment card, there's a line for what you want to speak to. The individuals indicating they want to speak to specific agenda items on that agenda can be put at the front of the line. Right now, it's under former policy, it was first come, first serve. So if you had the ability to stand in line, get the comment card first, you could be called first. The policy now allows for reprioritization so that those who are speaking to agenda topics that the governing board will be acting on will be able to speak first. Public comment used to be up to 3 minutes, and then that could be adjusted based on the number of speakers. That's now up to 2 minutes and can still be adjusted. There is a provision in that policy language that would allow for the potential for online registration. Some other districts do that, so you can sign up ahead of time versus having to come in and fill out paperwork. We may go to electronic registration both before the meeting and at the meeting. You might have noticed watching some of our board meetings that we can't read some people's handwriting. So being able to know who's submitting it and make sure that it's completely filled out is helpful. The other thing that the policy allows for but doesn't require is the ability to have a public comment portion that's online only. That would then get posted to the website. So people who want to share public comment but either can't come to the board meeting, are fearful to come to the board meeting, whatever the reason might be, they would be able to submit that public comment. It is a public record. It would get posted on the website as part of public comment and shared with the governing board. That's contemplated but not required as something that's possible. We know they do that in Chandler. It seems to work pretty well. So we're looking at all those options. So, the biggest change is focusing on public comment relating to topics within the board's jurisdiction. So if you wanted to come and talk about Russia and Ukraine, it's really nothing the school district can do about that. If you wanted to talk about how we're teaching history of Russian aggression in the Baltics, now it's probably something that could be within the jurisdiction of the board. So that in some respects could be a gray area. We have a specific statute in Arizona, prohibition on electioneering. So if someone comes in to campaign for any office, that'll get cut off. But otherwise, the focus of people speaking at public comment should either look at what's on the agenda or something that's within the purview of the governing board.
Okay, great. And when do those changes go into effect?
Oh, now. Yeah,
Okay.
it was approved last night, so they're effective immediately. There's no legislative delay before implementation.
Okay, great. Any last questions? We have 2 minutes. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Can I give you the mic?
Yeah. Okay, so first up, we have James Dorr. He is the SUSD Chief Security Officer.
Good morning. I do have a presentation. So
Okay, perfect.
let's size that. All right, good morning, everybody. She said, I'm James Dorr. I'm the Chief Security Officer for the school district, which is in essence I'm responsible for the physical security aspect and safety of our school district. So my background is law enforcement. I worked 21 years with the Scottsdale Police Department and worked with the school resource unit at that time. And then in 2010 came to work for the school district. So I've been here for about 12 years now. So I want to take just a few minutes to talk about what we do to keep our schools safe. And everything we do is developed in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies. It's not stuff that we've come up necessarily by ourselves. We work with our partners to ensure that we're talking best practice and communicating and working on the same language and the same playing field there. So we use FEMA's emergency management cycle, which includes mitigation, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. But we like to do it as an integrated approach. So it's what I do corresponds directly with what Shannon Cron does. And everything we do kind of works together to try to make our schools as safe as possible. So one of those things that we deal with that I'm responsible for is the Liaison to the School Resource Officer program. And our officers, our SROs, are law enforcement officers on campus. They are sworn police officers from the jurisdiction that they come from, either Scottsdale PD or Phoenix PD, depending on which school. But they're also supposed to be teachers and informal counselors for our students. So we have a great relationship with our SROs. They're a really huge asset for us on our campus, so we appreciate having them. Then I'm responsible for the physical infrastructure aspect of safety, which includes all our fences and gates and alarms and bells and whistles and things of that nature, which all ties into the physical safety aspect of our campuses. I also help with our emergency operations plans. Our schools, each one of our schools has a written document that outlines the emergency operations for their campus. The district has an overarching one as well. And then each classroom has a response guide, so each classroom teacher has a little kind of a flip chart that they're able to look at for information. But I'd like to point out that it's the process of going through and learning the information that makes you prepared. It's not necessarily the piece of paper that makes you prepared, because if you just have a piece of paper and it sits on the counter and nobody reads it, it doesn't do us a lot of good. So it's a lot about the process of building this information that makes us better. So everybody is responsible for safety in the district, but we do have select members of our security department. We have about a 30-person security team throughout the district, at least 30 people that are allocated. We're hiring. Anybody know anybody that wants to work for security, please let me know. We're always hiring. Our communication department, which I see Christine Harrington is here this morning from communications. They're a big part of our school safety aspect because they communicate directly with the parents during an emergency. We try to do as much as we can for the sites during an emergency so that they don't have to do it. They can focus on the safety of the kids. And Christine Harrington's crew does an excellent job of communicating out with the public. We have our student information management teams, or SIMAR, that are trained for being taking care of reunification. So when something bad happens, we have to get the kids back to the right parents. So we have a SIMAR team that's trained to be able to go through that process. And then each school has an incident command team, and the district has an incident command team. So the schools have a responsibility that's focused very heavily on student reunification, because their goal is, again, to get the kids back to the right parents. And the district provides the support for some of the larger aspects of that. So a little bit of training that we do for our district. Every employee is trained in basic emergency procedures. So at the start of the school year, they either take it in person or they do it on a Moodle course for emergency preparedness. And then those that are part of that emergency command team, incident command team, have to take FEMA courses. And we do some site-specific training for them on what that means for their school. Then we do the training on the parent-student reunification process, and our security team does in-service training. We use a video called ASAP to train our teachers and our staff on how to respond to active shooters. Unfortunately, that's something that we have to include within our curriculum for our staff. It really is designed to make them think through the process and be better prepared in case we were ever faced with something as drastic as that. And then there's other trainings that's primarily out of Shannon's office. That takes care of all these wonderful things for us. It's the aspect of safety that we have to consider, and she's going to talk about that today. And exercises. Each one of our schools does, at a minimum, evacuation drills every month. They do their fire drill every month. You've probably been on campus at some point when they've done a fire drill. We do 3 lockdown drills per year and 2 shelter-in-place drills per year. In addition, we do tabletop exercises for our administrators, and we do exercises regarding reunification so that we're hopefully prepared to make that a smooth process if it, when it occurs. We try to debrief every one of our exercises so that we're learning from our mistakes and that we can hopefully not repeat the mistakes. Then we take those lessons that we've learned and we reincorporate them into our plans. We attend quarterly meetings with an emergency response preparedness consortium that shares best practices. That's a group from around the Maricopa County that gets together of other school districts to beg, borrow, and steal from each other for ideas. And we also have membership in the Arizona Department of Education Safety Advisory Council. So when something bad happens, here's what we try to figure out what we're doing. I want my campuses to think through the simplest aspect of an emergency. Are my kids safer staying inside, or are they safer getting outside? That's the simplest way to look at a decision-making tree from an emergency. So if they're getting outside, that creates an evacuation, either an on-site or off-site evacuation. Or if they're staying in, it's a lockdown, a modified lockdown, or a shelter in place. So these are the protocols that the schools practice to be prepared in case of an emergency. So how it all should look, if something bad happens, it comes together. You have our school, and let's say we've had a problem at a school. They initiate their protocols, such as a lockdown or an evacuation, and they notify police and fire. So police and fire are already responding to this, and especially at our campuses that have SROs, they're immediately available for that. They contact me. You see the big smiley face? I'm always Mr. Friendly for them. But I'm pretty much on call 24/7 so that they can contact me for any time they have a question or a problem. And then I contact our communications department, and we work out who's calling who, basically. So we get our district leadership notified, and communications notifies the parents. We get our transportation set up, we get our SEMAR teams, building services, nutritional services, our district incident command team. Everybody gets rolling to this party, unfortunately. We'll set up a staging area and a reunification center. And then we will transport the students to a reunification center to reunite them with the parents. So if it's a serious incident, that's what this process would look like. So something I want to point out with our emergency communications, it's automated voice calling. So we do the voice, text, or email, or all the above, depending on the nature of the emergency. It pulls the data in from our Synergy, which is our student information management. So I really encourage all of you to tell the parents that you're representing to make sure that their information is up to date in the school's database, because that, for an emergency, that's where we draw our information. If your information is out of date, you've recently updated a phone number or something along those lines, you won't get notified. So that's really important for us. And I put a bullet on the speed of information and verification, because almost all of our kids, even the little ones, have cell phones now. Just nature of the world. So you very well may get some sort of notification from your child that something is happening before you get a notification from the school district, because we will not send out information through communications until we have it verified, because unfortunately we don't want to spread the rumor. And your kids may spread the rumor. So the information you get from your student may not be the most accurate of information. It may be something they've heard from Johnny or Susie, and sometimes that's just not quite accurate. So we won't send it out until we can verify it. Yes, ma'am.
You even point out interesting that most kids have phones. Do you have a recommendation for parents in situations like this? Is it wise for the students to be contacting their parents? Or is it better for them to be listening to what's...
So we want them to listen to what's being told, right? We want them to be paying attention to the directions of the teacher for wherever they're at that time. But one of those things that we may even ask the kids to do is to contact your parent. If it's safe to do so, we're going to ask that, because when you get that text from us, all it does is it makes you really uneasy. But when you get that text from your own kid, it lets you know your child's okay. And so that really helps to reduce the anxiety for our parents. So we don't necessarily mind that a student is contacting parent, but it's time, place, appropriateness is the key for us. We don't want them doing that very first thing. We want them to follow the lockdown procedures, for example, and to be quiet and to sit quietly, or whatever the teacher's telling them to do. Once it's safe to do so, it's not a bad thing for your child to contact you. Just letting you know I'm okay even. That goes a long way. I can give you a brief example of it. We had a situation up at Desert Mountain where we have Desert Mountain and we have Mountainside that are across the parking lot from each other. There was at the time, what they thought was a man with a gun that was in the parking lot between the two schools. So both schools went into lockdown. Turned out it wasn't a gun, but nevertheless. Both schools went into lockdown. The middle school had worked really hard at telling their kids, don't get on your phone. So the middle school didn't communicate, their kids didn't communicate directly with the parents. Where at the high school, all the kids were texting their parents because it happened right before release. So they're texting their parents saying, I can't believe we're going to be here. I can't believe they're going to hold us beyond the school day. Oh my goodness, this is terrible. The parents at the middle school were very amped up because they never heard from their kids. Where at the high school level, they were like, yeah, chill, no big deal. Junior's okay. So it's a lesson that we learned that having a kid communicate is not a bad thing. Thank you for the question. So reunification is something that we strive to have a plan for. And the goal is to be able to get the kids back to the right parents. So we use our high schools as our reunification centers, but we'll notify you at the time of the incident which high school we may be taking your kids to. It may not be the closest high school. It just depends on the nature of the emergency and what's going on at the school, the high schools at the time. If we have an event at one of the high schools that happens to be the closest high school, we may not send you there. So just pay attention to the messaging that's coming out and trying to give you a sense of what's going on and where to go. We try to give that information as best we can to keep people in the loop. Questions? Yes, sir.
We do any training for subs or any staff that come on campus afterwards?
Okay, great question. Subs or staff that come on campus. So subs go through the same Moodle presentation that we have for emergency preparedness. At the start of the year, when they sign up to be a substitute, they're supposed to go through that as well. When they come to the individual campus, they pick up their keys, and there's a little packet that they get. It's a little different at each one of the schools, but there's a packet that they get that says, take a look at your emergency chart. In your classroom, you have little Johnny who has a peanut allergy, or whatever the specifics are for that particular substitute. So it's not the same, but it's something better than nothing for them coming in to have some piece of information that tries to get them set for the school day. Yes, ma'am.
It's a very small piece of information, and quite honestly, as a sub, I've been into several different schools.
Okay.
And when I walk into a high school that has 3,000 kids, and there's a piece of paper that says, follow this directory to get out of the building, or in case of a lockdown, you don't have enough time to really.
To read through it.
But honestly, I was, before you asked the question, I had a thought about it. If there's some kind of an email that you can send to subs at the beginning of the year, just to remind them that these are very specific protocols that are campus-wide, district-wide, just take a second and pay attention to these now, because on the day that you're subbing, you might be, I was there on the day that we had a bomb threat on campus at Mountainside, and I had kids hysterical in classroom, and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with these kids? I don't know what to do with them, and I can't get a hold of the front office, and they're communicating through the teacher's email.
Right,
Not
right,
mine. So
right.
I had.
You didn't get the same
nothing.
stuff, right?
Right, because I'm a sub. So that really, I think, needs to be addressed.
To
and
cleaned up.
something To pay attention to, because if I'm a sub in the teacher's classroom, I don't have access to their email.
Right.
I don't have access to their text, and I may not be able to have the front office directly call my classroom, because sometimes the communication is slow or backed up or whatever,
Right.
So that needs to be something that should be addressed.
And did you take the online course? Okay, good, good. Making sure that is happening.
Included at the beginning of the year for schools.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
It might not be a bad idea. If you know you're going to be setting at Desert Mountain High School, for example,
Mhm.
which is where I have set most, maybe then if I'm invited to that meeting.
Start of the year.
With the safety protocols, then I mean, I don't have to be there for the whole teacher presentation, but if I'm there
Right.
for half an hour just to learn what the basic protocols are there at that specific campus, then that would go miles.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Great idea. Thank you.
So going along with the question on the sub, peanut allergy, taking it down a level to classrooms and subs being aware of children's needs in the classroom, are subs also filled in on behavioral concerns with specific students in the class? Because I know that behavioral issues are huge this year.
So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I know that some teachers are really good about when they leave their lesson plan, they leave some of that information, but not, I would venture to guess that not everybody is doing that.
Okay.
So they may or may not.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question about lockdown kits.
Mhm.
Will the district be providing them for the classrooms, or is it up to each school to?
So it's a little bit of both. We have probably 60% or so of our campuses that have been provided a kit through the district. The rest of them are still, that's a consistent kit. The rest of them are still a little bit of hodgepodge. We have some that were from many, many years ago that they still have. We have actually 2 different styles of kits that were purchased many, many years ago. So slowly but surely, each year we're buying more and we're sending them out to get that 60%, hopefully up to 100%.
Okay, so.
Which
schools
school are you at?
I'm at Copper Ridge.
Copper Ridge, okay.
And I was, in my former PTO role, I was
Mhm.
responsible for the middle school lockdown kits. But I realized after stocking all the middle school classrooms that the elementary didn't have any. And the teachers didn't have training on what to do with them. So I was the only one who knew what tarp and the bucket.
What was in
and,
there,
you know.
right.
And then there were things like gloves that were not in there and, just first
Yeah.
aid kits or, So it was sort of a concern of mine for a little while.
Yeah, yeah,
But
we
then
have not gotten to
pandemic
Copper
hit.
Ridge yet. It's
Okay.
still one of the ones that is, they have, my understanding of Copper Ridge is they have like 90 rooms or whatever that is, then like 60 of them have something in it, but it's a mixture of something. It may be, like you say, there's no gloves, there's no this, and the other ones have nothing in it. So it's my understanding of Copper Ridge.
Well, and my concern for Copper Ridge specifically is that we have the airport right there. We're under the flight path.
Oh, yeah.
So, there's all sorts of emergencies that could apply to our school.
Sure,
So, all right.
sure,
Well,
yeah.
thank you.
We're working on that one.
Okay.
Little by little, we're buying more.
All right.
Thank you so much for the information. One of the areas that I personally see up in the Desert Mountain and Laguna area is everyday dangers of traffic and the way people drive around our schools. And I have talked to SROs, I've called the schools many times. Just wondering if there is that your area as well? And if we continue to see issues, what's the best approach that parents can take when we have major concerns about our children's safety with traffic?
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome to contact me with that, and I'll work with the city's traffic engineering when it's appropriate to try to get a permanent fix if it's something that's along a traffic engineering line, or I work with the police department to try to do enforcement when it's an enforcement issue. Mostly enforcement, yeah. Yeah, we tried to get the SROs to get out there and do some enforcement, and more importantly, to bring the motors over to do enforcement, because they're more proficient at it. So, yeah, contact me.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have to table any more questions for Mr. Dorr because we've got Shannon as well as Melissa. So thank you very
All right.
much.
Hiya. Continue without skipping.
was going to say, mine might be really short if it won't open. All right. Thank you so much.
Forward and back.
Oh, thank you. All right. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm Shannon Cron, the Director of Support Services for the Scottsdale School District. And this morning, I'm going to talk to you about our threat assessment process. So I'm not sure how many parents are aware that we have a threat assessment process in the district. I think it's sometimes can be alarming to people when they hear that. But just to give you a little bit of background, I think Scottsdale is probably one of the leading districts in the state when it comes to threat assessment process. So it's something that we have been doing in Scottsdale for several years. And then back in 2019, Arizona Department of Education received a grant. And with that grant, they were expected to look at how to make our schools, an even safer place. And what they learned is that a lot of our districts do not have a threat assessment process in place. And so they spent that grant money on bringing in Dr. Dewey Cornell from the University of Virginia, who specializes in threat assessment, and identifying 20 trainers from across the state to go through his training and then become state trainers. And so I was one of those 20 people that went through his training, and so I'm one of the Arizona Department of Education state trainers. And so now in Scottsdale, we have adopted the Dewey Cornell, it's called the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guideline practice. So I'll share a little bit about that with you guys today, and just feel free at any point in time to raise your hands, ask questions. This is a very high-level kind of overview of a very serious conversation. All right, so I just shared with you a little bit about Dr. Dewey Cornell. So he is an expert in school threat assessments. He developed that comprehensive threat assessment guide back in 2001. He worked with the Secret Service Agency and the FBI and really looked at, kind of a history of school violence. And so now, we've had several school shootings, unfortunately, since then, and he has worked with several of those school shooters. So if this was a whole big, long training that we would give to our administrators, we would be talking about kind of that rationale for threat assessment, the use of the guidelines, the different pathways to violence. We talk about the research and evidence, why it's so important that we have, this practice in place. We talk about practical issues. Administrators, school psychologists, counselors, everybody on that threat assessment team has the opportunity to walk through some of these exercises together, practice being part of the team, and then we talk about implementation. So what this actually looks like on our school campus. So it's an 8-hour training that all of our administrators, school psychologists, counselors, psychologists, counselors, social workers go through every year. So what is a threat assessment? So a threat assessment, it's a problem-solving approach to violence prevention. It involves assessment, intervention for students that have maybe threatened violence in some way. So our goal is really to prevent violence, okay? So not just to react, but prevent. And so there's 3 different, really kind of components to the threat assessment process. So that first is identification. And that is where, perhaps we learn about a student that has maybe a threat, posed a threat, somebody's concerned about something. Oftentimes, we learn information from friends, family members, a teacher, shares information. So that information is, brought to us. And then we evaluate, the seriousness of that threat. So was something said on the playground out of anger, right? Or somebody upset because, you took my boyfriend or my girlfriend, right? So we have to look at what is the seriousness of that threat. Does a student actually pose a threat, or did they just make a threat? Does a student have, poor problem solving? And so they're doing their best that they can to solve problems, but what that sounds like is making, a statement or, something, an inappropriate threat. And then we look at intervention, which is really our response to that behavior. And so in Scottsdale, you guys have heard a lot about, kind of our comprehensive support model and, prevention, right? And so what we know is that prevention does not require prediction. And oftentimes people come to us and say, that person is dangerous. Or, they try to identify, who it is that's going to, become violent, right? Or cause harm. And the reality is we have no way of predicting that. And that is what has come out of,
Secret Service, FBI, all of that, the studies that have been done, is we don't have any way of predicting, but what we should be focusing on is prevention. And so everything that James talked about is so important, but the number one way that we make our schools safe is by focusing on prevention and focusing on giving students tools to address social emotional needs. And so just like kind of that public health model, we don't know who's going to get in a car accident, right? We all drove here today, right? But we can't predict. We can't predict if somebody's going to get into their car on the way home and get in an accident. So what we can do is try to put preventative techniques in place. So we, follow the speed limit. We wear a seatbelt, right? We do different things to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves healthy, and to prevent that accident from occurring. And the same thing happens in the schools. So, okay. So we follow that 3-tiered model of prevention. So what we have learned is that, again, the quickest way to make, or the best way to make our schools safe is to focus on prevention. So what we have learned is that in every single one of those, acts of school violence, somebody knew about it. It wasn't a surprise. And so that student had said, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to hurt somebody, I'm going to harm somebody, right? And students, had that information. Sometimes, kids go to administrators or teachers and share that information, and we can intervene, right? If somebody doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't feel like they're going to be taken seriously, perhaps they don't have those type of relationships with, staff or teachers on their campus, that is when, schools can be very unsafe, not secure, right? And so we really have to focus on that school-wide prevention. Yeah.
Is there any anonymous way for students to provide information?
So that's a great question. So, they can share information with teachers. There's a lot of ways for them to come forward, share it with a friend. We've talked about those anonymous tips, and James, you can probably share more about.
We don't have an actual anonymous tip line. We have I can't think of what it's called. It's kind of like Silent Witness through the police department that is available for somebody to put a tip through that way that's on our website. But we don't have a school-specific anonymous tip line.
Because I can tell you personally, I have a kid who's quite anecdotal about my younger son. He's small, he gets bullied a little bit. We address it, but sometimes he's embarrassed. He doesn't want to tell anybody. He's want to tell the teacher, but I want him to the place where he knows he's safe and someone who's listening and getting that information. Besides just us, if he will even tell us. So that's where the idea comes from, someplace where the kids know that they can get that information on, drop it in the box, with a note, or they don't have a phone, if they have to, there's a text this to that, or whatever.
Right, text-to-tip type idea. Yeah, I know it's through the police department. I can't think of what it's called right now. I apologize, but I can look it up. It's on our website for a tip thing that actually goes through law enforcement to come to us first, or through law enforcement first to come to us. But it's not a school-based one.
And I like that. That's a great idea. Just the tip box, right, where somebody can write something down. What we have learned is, that kids tend to take that very seriously, so they don't tend to over-report. And that is part of, kind of that school-wide prevention. So when kids are really young, we start with the difference between reporting and tattling, right? Advocating for help and tattling, right? Tattling is when you're saying something to get somebody in trouble. Reporting is when you're sharing information because you're concerned. So just kind of going back to, yeah.
We have a situation where you have a child that is obviously discussing what is happening, or can hear things, and go to the proper channel. Emailing the teacher, emailing the principal. And we have a situation where the teacher is responding, but is stopping at a level, principal level. Where are the parents going next?
So, great question. If you feel like it's not being heard and you've worked with your school teacher, you've worked with your school principal, you can come to support services and share that information with me, and then I go out and investigate and work with the school teams. Going back to, I guess, the slide, that school-wide prevention. So that's where we really talk about, PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. So across the board, we really focus on teaching those positive behavioral expectations. What does that look like? What do we expect students, to do? How do they act on a school campus? We focus on relationship building and school connectedness. So we know that when students feel connected to their campus, when they have those relationships, those positive relationships with any adult, it could be somebody in the front office, it could be their teacher, it could be a social worker, but somebody that they feel connected to. We increase the likelihood that if somebody does feel unsafe or they have information that needs to be reported, that will happen. So again, looking at that history of school violence, somebody knew and that information was not reported in a timely manner. And so, when it comes to keeping our students safe, that's why, that tier 1, when we talk about, PBIS, we talk about, social emotional learning, it's so important. So not only are our kids, developing those skills, to help them be successful and be part of the community, they're also helping keep their school safe. So tier 2, and you've heard me talk about this probably several times, is when we provide supports for those students that are at risk. So maybe students that, have experienced some bullying, maybe students that are being bullied, maybe students that have poor problem-solving skills or, difficulty with, healthy coping, maybe students that are saying things, inappropriate things to get attention. How do we get attention in a way that might be more appropriate? And then tier 3 is looking at, students where, they need more than that small group. These might be students that have underlying, mental health issues, students that could be, in this case, on that pathway to violence. So how do we intervene and provide those additional supports? Oftentimes that is referrals to, community organizations, and students that, pose a serious threat. It might be an alternative placement. And in a few cases, we have gone for expulsion. So that's rare, but it does happen. So one of the things when it comes to threat assessment is that fear is a barrier to prevention. And that is because when we hear about school shootings, it skews our perception, right? It is so alarming and so scary that we are afraid, and parents become afraid. They're afraid to send their kids to school. They're afraid that they're not safe. When we hear, something happened, parents, they come and they pick their kids up from school, and then you're left with that feeling of, is my student safe? Is it safe to send them the next day? What could possibly happen? And so, those school shootings, it scares people, right? And it does. It makes us feel that, schools are not a safe place. In reality, and this slide is a little old because it was, right after Sandy Hook, so it was the first 6 years after Sandy Hook, so prior to the pandemic, there was 389 school shootings. So in 6 years, we had 389 school shootings. That's a lot, right? 389 too many. So the majority of those school shootings, they were a murder-suicide. So typically, students that were engaged in a relationship that did not work. There's also, gang-related activity. So the majority of those school shootings are gang-related or murder-suicide. There were 600,000 shootings outside of school. And so what that means is that for every school shooting, there was 1,500 shootings that happened outside of school. So our students' chances are our chances. Students, yeah. And what that means is that, so a student's chance of being shot at a restaurant are 10 times or greater than if they were on a school campus. Isn't that scary? And we go to restaurants all the time. And so when we talk about school violence, we shouldn't really be talking about school violence. It needs to be shifted to, we have an issue with gun violence, right? Not necessarily school violence. Schools are safe, but, it is, when we hear these things, it really kind of skews our perception. So the threat assessment process, just so you guys know, it's not designed to determine whether or not a student made a threat. Students make threats all the time, right? You guys are all parents. You probably have already made a threat this morning, right? Your student isn't getting ready as quickly as they wanted. Yeah, they weren't eating breakfast. A lot of times, yeah, if you don't get ready, then this is going to happen, right? So when we are out of ideas, when we are out of, that positive reaction, we oftentimes make a threat, okay? And students do the same thing. So perhaps, they're engaged in a conflict, with another student in their classroom, one of their peers, a friend. They might say something, which out of anger, out of frustration, out of sadness, we investigate those threats, but oftentimes those are transient, meaning there's no real intent to harm. The students that we are concerned about are the ones that not necessarily made a threat, but the students that pose a threat. Okay, so there is that intent to harm. They're typically quiet. They oftentimes don't come forward. Perhaps they're on one of those pathways to violence. They don't have a lot of maybe protective factors in the home. So those are all things that we look for, but not necessarily did they make a threat. It's does a student pose a threat. So we're really looking at it from two different angles. So in regards to, the threat assessment and making sure that this process works and it's keeping our students, safe, there's two different areas that, as school administrators, we really have to avoid. And that first one is overreaction, right? So because people are so afraid of school violence, oftentimes we overreact. We overreact to something that maybe was said on the playground, overreact to maybe something that happened, at home or online. In this situation, the student was suspended for eating his Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. His district had a zero tolerance policy, okay? So did he pose a threat? No. Did he make a threat? He ate it in the shape of a gun, pretended like he was shooting somebody, and he was suspended. So there are times where we overreact, right? There are also times where we underreact, okay? So, and that would be a situation where perhaps, something wasn't taken seriously, or, the student was very, we felt that was very connected to school or had, peers and friends and, protective factors in the home. So there's, the chance where, if there was a concern that was raised, we didn't take it seriously. That would be an example of underreaction. And that is why it's so important for districts to have the threat assessment in place. And so we take every single threat seriously and make sure that we are not overreacting, but we're not underreacting either. And so with the threat assessment, process, there are several people who are involved or part of that team, okay? So the principal or the assistant principal, they are the leader of the team, right? And the reason why is because the majority of the time, a lot of these situations, they look like they're disciplined, right? And so something happens on the playground, something happens at home, somebody said something, they're concerned or they saw something online, they go to an assistant principal and they report it, and again, it sometimes looks like it might be discipline. So the AP, the principal, they start that investigation. Most of the time, they can say this is a transient threat, right? There's no real intent to harm, okay? If it's transient, support services could be put in place, interventions put in place, and the student, goes about their day. Where, we can't say that this is a transient threat, that is where, the team comes together and they start to, really investigate. So they interview, the student who is potentially, a threat. They interview witnesses or peers. They interview teachers, parents. There's perhaps a chance that a mental health screening is going to take place. So they're really looking at, the student's behavior across multiple environments. So how does a student present? Do they have friends? Are they able to connect? What's happening in the, home environment? Have there been a lot of changes? Does that student have, protective factors in place? What risk factors could be, influencing their behavior? Are they already connected to any type of, community supports? What does their problem-solving skills look like? Is there mental health issues? Has the student had a change in medication? And so when the team comes together, your mental health staff, so whether it's a school social worker, counselor, psychologist, they are conducting some of those interviews. Our nurse, might be conducting some of those interviews. The teacher is a part of that, sharing, information about what they see in the classroom, how they connect, if they've, observing behavior. Have they had a change in behavior lately? Have they had a change in appearance? Sometimes, kids come to school and all of a sudden, they stop caring what they looked like, right? And so that can be, a warning sign that perhaps something else is going on. So all of these people come together. If there is an imminent threat, meaning at any point in the process, they're concerned that the student, poses a potential threat to harm immediately, law enforcement is obviously brought in. Law enforcement and a lot of these more serious threats are brought in anyways. Sometimes, with our middle school, high school students, even elementary, I guess, law enforcement is, already involved. And so not only are we looking at it from a school perspective in regards to what do we need to do to keep our students safe, right? But it's happening in the community level as well. And so here, this is a decision tree factor. And so there's 5 different steps that the team, really goes through together to determine whether or not, if this is transient, what do? We put support services in place. If we still don't have enough information, or we're concerned, we move to the next level, that substantive. So again, several different pieces, to this process. Several different people are involved. We review, a history, academic history, discipline history, medical history. A ton of information is brought to that team to consider and to really, identify, what level of threat is this and what should our response to that, behavior be. The majority of the time, students end up, being referred for, services, both on school campus, oftentimes in community campuses. Typically, the safest place for students to be is in the classroom with eyes on them and getting support. If it's a student who, is considered, a potential, threat to self or to others, that is a situation where perhaps the student is not going to return to our campus. But oftentimes, they do. And research shows that that is really the safest place, for kids, is to be a part of the community, to learn, how to socialize, get along with others, and make sure that they're just getting, those supports as well. And so our mental health screening, so I added some extra slides. This is really long. I was actually planning to stop at that one, just because I know Melissa has to go as well. Just another, I guess, component that I haven't really talked about is, in regards to the threat assessment, something that we often do in conjunction with that threat assessment is also a risk assessment. So students that display any sort of like homicidal behavior, if they also display suicidal ideation, the likelihood that they would, commit a violent act increases significantly. Most of the time, when you look at, those real violent offenders or school shooters, they don't care if they live, right? So they know that they are going to commit a violent act and they're also going to die themselves. And so if a student wants to live, it decreases the likelihood that they're going to commit any sort of violent act as well. So just so you guys know, there's so many different pieces, to this threat assessment process. Our goal, our focus is really on, making sure that our campuses are safe from that tier 1 level, providing those supports to students that need more at that tier 2. And then really, diving deep into, the threat assessment process, the risk assessment process when needed. So that's it. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
One, thank you. Goodness, I didn't know it was karaoke night. Thank you for doing this too. But 2, can you talk more about the tier 1? Because we've heard a whole lot about what I would say the 1%, the 5% of things that could happen.
Right.
But a lot of what gets up there could be mitigated in tier 1. And so can you talk about what some people, not me, call the soft skills as opposed to like the essentials? Good morning, how are you, how was your day? Like all those little nuggets of information that teachers ascertain and find out, informally, that can help them inform what they need to do formally.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what Stuart is talking about is really, that positive behavior, support model, right? And so helping students feel connected to their school, helping students, know that they are more than a test score or more than, did they do their homework last night, that they actually matter. So the majority of our, teachers, of course, this comes very naturally, for them. Others, they love their subject area. We might have to work with them a little bit more on, some of those soft skills where, they're greeting their students and, making sure that they're asking about their soccer game or their basketball game last night. But, building those relationships and with the students. So when the students feel safe, they feel like they matter, the likelihood that they're going to report any kind of information increases, that they're going to feel safe, they're going to feel connected. It increases academic achievement as well. And then also, part of that tier 1 is really, making sure that we are implementing that social emotional learning curriculum, with our students, and giving students the opportunity to, meet up, buddy up, have conversations. Oftentimes we have to shift like our morning meetings in elementary to after recess so they can talk about what happened, on the playground. And they can be a part of that problem-solving team. So somebody can say, hey, you know what, I really wanted to jump rope, but they wouldn't play with me. They wouldn't share the jump ropes with me. And then they can have a conversation and be a part of the community. The meetup buddy ups, I love that. It happens so quickly during, the school day. It's kids line up, right? They go to lunch together. So, hey, talk to your, neighbor and share something, that made you happy this morning, right? It gives them an opportunity to, talk to somebody else in their classroom, form connections, realize, they're not alone. They might have something in common with somebody that they never thought they would be friends with. And so it's really about just those tiny little tricks or strategies, to help our students connect, to feel safe, and give them opportunities to practice, those soft skills, right? Sometimes, if you're having a two-way conversation and I'm talking to you about my soccer game last night and you turn around and walk away from me, that's weird, right? That's weird. And so it might decrease the likelihood that I'm going to try to have a conversation with you again. And now you think I'm mean, but you have no idea how your own behavior impacted that situation and what others think of you. And so that is part of, that tier 1, helping students, recognize, the things that they do, the things that they say, and how that impacts what other people think about them, right? And it also impacts what other people, how they make other people feel. And so that is something that we really seen, this year especially, is that our kids are so used to hiding behind, a screen or a phone that sometimes they say things, or they post things that they post things or type things that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable saying to somebody. And so, one of my favorite things to do when I used to run groups is we would have a bucket in the middle of the circle, and I would have all the kids, put their phones in the middle of it. And I'd say, let's talk, we're going to talk. And so, it was their choice, but every single student, every single time, did it. And they would put their phone, in the bucket, and we would talk. It was the student assistance programs, but we would talk to each other. And, without having, that distraction, they learned how to make eye contact. They learned how to really listen. They learned what it felt like to be heard and understood. Realized that, they don't always have to have the answers. You don't always have to provide feedback, but just being there, really is what people need a lot of times. And so, that's all the different things that come along with, that tier 1 social emotional learning curriculum is, not only teaching those behavioral expectations so kids feel safe on a campus, but also teaching them how to be a part of the community and to get along with others, to form those meaningful friendships, with their peers, and then also form those meaningful, relationships with adults. And that's why, when we talk about threat assessment, I almost hate talking about it because the focus, really has to be on that tier 1, and that's how we keep our schools safe. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so great question. And I would say both. So both. So we have monthly meetings, for each kind of stakeholder group. And with a threat assessment, oftentimes, I think it's important to bring those groups together so they're hearing the same message. And so, for example, our APs and our school psychologists came together, for the threat assessment training. And so that way, they all heard the same information. They knew how to, create that threat assessment team, together for their campus. They understood, kind of and have a better understanding of what their roles are and how to work together. So we definitely do, the large group, more presentation style like this, and then give them the opportunities where, we give them case, studies that they have to work through together and then share out and talk about, did we all kind of come to the same conclusion? What were the risk factors? What protective factors in place? What is your response to this behavior? And kind of talk through, the different situations and especially the tricky ones. And then, as needed, I often get called out to, different campuses to help, investigate a situation, or, sometimes, kids don't know me, right? Because I'm not, on their campus on a daily basis. And so I'll often go in to observe a situation just so they've got, a different set of eyes, on a concern. Or, if they're really, struggling with, with kind of a response, right? Definitely do a lot of phone consultations, and then often, times on site as well. So,
Okay, thank you.
and-
Sorry, we do have to move on. We
yeah,
still
sorry.
have Melissa, but thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, sorry. Thank you, guys.
And I'm sure your contact information is available if people reach out to you individually. Great, thank you.
So Melissa doesn't have a formal presentation, but just a brief introduction. I'm Melissa Sakos, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Secondary. Of my 21 years in Scottsdale, 15 of those have been directly in student services, with my last position being the Executive Director of Student Services. And I've also overseen special ed, community education, career technical education, so a number of things, but this is where my heart is. Shannon and James are the true experts in the field regarding the physical safety and the social emotional safety. I just want to tell you that this is really top of mind in SUSD. We have really been, what I believe, not because I used to oversee the department, but the premier district in terms of being ahead of the game when implementing things such as positive behavior intervention and supports. We have presenters that go to the national conference that are recognized. And then, of course, people turn to us for our threat assessment process. So with that, our goal 2 in our strategic plan is the climate and culture. And the positive climate and culture can only be done when students feel a sense of safety and when parents feel that sense of safety and send in their kids to school. So that will be an area of focus. You will hear the terms like MTSS, which is multi-tier systems of support. That encompasses the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So just as much as we are focusing on tier 1 first best instruction, teaching kids how and differentiating for them, that's what we have to do on the behavior side as well. Teach those behavioral expectations so that kids know how to be a part of a community and act as such, where they don't present themselves as aggressive to other individuals. So that is very much a part of our strategic plan. We're going to continue to really focus on training. And you saw a brief slide on that. This could really be an 8-hour workshop and talking about support services. So again, you've got 2 great experts. I'm always happy to answer questions. And with that, any questions?
Mentioned that at times it is, am I not that loud enough? Shannon had mentioned at times it's best to have the problem, I hate to call them problem child, better in class versus outside. But when it's causing the other children in the classroom who are not having the problem be scared to go to school and not be safe, how is that, I guess, how does that work out? Because I understand the whole point of keeping the kid and trying to, get them better, but it's at the detriment of other kids, and then they feel like they don't want to go. And I'm curious how that works out.
Well, that is taken into consideration in terms of excluding a student from the classroom environment. So until there can be some restorative practices or circles so that everybody understands that there was no real intent to harm or bully, then that integration can safely happen. And if you're in a situation where you see that it's still disrupting and has students scared, then bring that to the attention of the teacher. So if your student's in a situation where, wow, this is still occurring, we like to teach our kids to see something, say something. And I think what Shannon said is critical. There's a difference between reporting and tattling. Tattling, she brought a lollipop in her lunchbox, and we're not supposed to have sugar at recess. That's a little bit different than saying, she said to me this word and that she was going to, meet me at the water fountain and, kick me in the gut. So that is really important as well.
All due respect, I think.
Sorry, I'm pushing with the microphone because I got emails every meeting that people who watch it online cannot hear, so.
Okay, so all due respect,
parents, I'm a parent, I have children at SUSD, and I know the difference when my kid comes home and is upset because they didn't get a lollipop. But what my problems are is if you're hearing, I'm going to shoot you at an elementary level, and you report it, but nothing gets done about it, or the fact that you hear inappropriate sexual comments made at young ages, and you do all the steps. You go to the teacher goes to the higher power, and then nothing's happening. So where are we supposed to go? We all know the difference between kids fighting because, oh, I have a boyfriend, you don't. But there's things at the elementary level that I'm just concerned about. And I can say that I know parents, we've done all the following. Go to the teacher, you're going to the vice principal, you're going to the principal, and then the buck stops. And the behaviors are continuing. At what point do our kids pay the cost for then you guys to intervene?
So oftentimes, it's one's perception that nothing has been done. And so that's where we could do a better job in saying, we're taking X, Y, and Z measures without violating FERPA, without violating the students' rights. Oftentimes, too, we have students with special education needs who also have their rights and protections, and then their behavior is manifested by their disability. Again, that's very difficult to say to somebody, Johnny that's really being the one that's, shouting out curse words actually has a disabling condition in which they're being serviced for. So again, if it becomes so egregious and repetitive, that's where Shannon and I can help and then step in with the principal, assistant principal, just to be another set of eyes on that. So, but we certainly can do a better job explaining to parents, you may see this student back here, but please know that we've taken some measures. Those measures could be a range of, again, we just don't want to violate FERPA and a student's rights. Okay, we'll write it on a note card. Mhm. Hi.
Are there any circumstances where it might fall under the umbrella of just automatic expulsion without investigation, going through the steps of, investigating?
So there's always an investigation that we have to afford our students their due process rights. There are situations in which you do the investigation, but it is an automatic recommendation for an expulsion hearing. Technically speaking, it is the governing board that expels students. We take them to a hearing. They have their due process rights. And then a hearing officer makes a recommendation. That recommendation goes to the governing board, and then they decide whether or not they will uphold that expulsion or not. But we have taken students to expulsion before when they pose an imminent threat to the campus, and they've executed some scary behaviors. So I'll give you an example of an automatic. If you bring a handgun to school and you're showing it, we're going to investigate, but we're also going to, that's one thing in the code of conduct that is, we will go for an expulsion hearing.
What about the circumstance brought up at the beginning of the meeting of overt racism, just completely overt? What should be done?
So we actually have a couple of campuses over the last few years where that has been a repeat behavior that we have seen on campuses. So we've actually brought in, Not My Kid has a training, and then we also have yeah. Yeah, so we bring in, there's a number of partners that we have to bring in, whether it's the 6th grade group that we're seeing this repeat behavior in or whole school. That's where we have to come in and provide that training. And sometimes it's just sensitivity training to a class or a grade level to say, do you understand how offensive this word is to individuals? Again, it's sometimes kids, we know the brain is not fully developed, that frontal lobe, and they say and do things that are really hurtful, and they don't really understand the depth of the harm that they're doing to others, and that's where we really have to make sure that they understand the harm that they are doing with their words.
Right. And I know it starts with the home, it starts with intervention, it starts with education. But I mean, that is pretty threatening. Like, so at what point would that become like a topic for expulsion?
Yeah, that's all circumstantial. I mean, I can run through a number of, scenarios in my mind, but there's going to be a lot of, interventions and trainings and removal from the environment before we would, expel. Because expulsion is indefinite. You have an option to reapply after 1 year after meeting the criteria, but expulsion is wrap up. You cannot be in school anymore.
Sorry, that was not directed at you. That was directed at her over there.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I know we're taking a lot of time.
So we have a few updates. If did you guys bring cards that you can leave cards for people to have your contact information?
I can write our name and contact information on the board up there. Hi, Bren.
I had a quick question. I'm going to speak really loudly so you don't have to bring to the microphone, but we keep hearing this word expulsion. And do you have any statistics that you can provide? Because I think, we hear the word expulsion, but it is incredibly difficult for a school to expel a child. So can you provide some specifics? How many kids does SUSD expel a year? How many kids in Arizona actually get expelled? Because my understanding is it's tremendously difficult to do process, and it should be. But do you have any stats that you can provide so people can appreciate the difficulty in, the process that's involved in expelling a child?
I don't have those statistics in front of me. I can tell you that prior to school year 1920, we were definitely in the double digits with expulsions. 2021, 0. Nobody was in school. And then what we've also done is alternative to expulsion as well, where students can choose to withdraw if they're not, again, posing an imminent threat. That perhaps they're going back to their home school, perhaps they're doing an online program, but they have a chance to continue their education. And in order to reapply to SUSD, should they be an underclassman, they have to go through the same readmissions requirements as if you were expelled, plus more. So, your grades, your attendance, remedial counseling services. So sometimes negative drug tests. So there's a whole laundry list of expectations to re-enroll, showing us that the parents have worked with them to gain some protective factors and some skills.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
That'd be great if you guys could all write your information up on the board over there. Thank you. Okay, so we just have a couple board updates. Here's our monthly budget report. We had some individual donations come in, as well as some grant money, and then our only expense was for interpretation services at our executive board meeting. And all of the SBC representatives should have received an email from me. We are getting ready for our election for next year's board. The nomination period is in April, and then the election is at the last meeting of the year. It will be done online as well, so you don't have to be in attendance. The executive board is elected by the SBC representatives, as well as any of the committee chairs and the current executive board. That is the voting body of our organization. So right now, we need some volunteers for our election committee. And we can have, according to our bylaws, we have 1 executive board member and up to 5 school representatives. So we will be meeting monthly on Zoom in March, April, and May. And then you will meet individually with people who are nominated as well to just vet them and inform them on the process. So if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to me. And then an update on what we talked about a lot last month, the aggregate expenditure limit. So that did get overridden in the legislature. I bring it up again this meeting because it was just a 1-year waiver. So this will be an issue again next year and the year after and the year after until there's a permanent fix put in place. It's in the Constitution, so it would need to be through, I believe, citizens voting on an initiative so the legislature can put that on the ballot. So you can continue to reach out to your representatives to encourage them to put a permanent place and fix for this. And last week, we had a special event, which was excellent, so I wanted to point it out. It was on news literacy. It was a presentation on misinformation, disinformation. It was really useful and hands-on. So that is available on our YouTube channel to watch. And then upcoming events this month, we have a gifted meeting. Karen Brown, the Director of Gifted and Accelerated Programs, she is giving a talk on critical thinking and essential skills. That's, all parents are welcome. That's here in this exact room on Tuesday, March 22nd at 6:30. And then also some committee news. Our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, they have their Instagram page and Twitter. Please follow those. It's SPCXEDI. And then now on Facebook, Stuart, who ran a fantastic series of information for Black History Month, is now putting up content every day on with women's history. And then our Special Education Committee, so SUSD is having these advisory meetings in each of the school complexes. So that's for parents to provide feedback on special education in SUSD and what they are looking to improvements, and those are some small groups working together too. So if you have questions about those or want to get involved, Dr. Kim Guerin is who to contact for that. And then the SUSD department is putting on a transitions fair March 31st, and that is focusing, I believe, on high school students transitioning into workforce and life after high school. And with that, if there's any SBC representatives that have announcements, I know we have one, thank you.
From Kokopah. I think the biggest thing that's going on right now is the influx of the Afghan families that are moved into our schools, which has been a phenomenal gift. So I can tell you that anecdotally, my kids have been coming home and telling me how excited they are to meet these kids, that they don't have these things, they want to provide them. They're actually going home and getting like stuff out of their own closets, bringing them to school and giving it to the kids. So it has been fantastic, I think, for everybody around in these schools. And my kids get to experience a new culture, new language, new things. So that's been really good. So I think that's the main thing, is really the Afghan families and what a kind of gift that is for us.
Yes.
Is there anything set up for donations, or is that just?
Yeah, there's an actual Facebook page.
Oh, there is.
Do you know the name of that Facebook page? Okay, while he's looking up, I forgot to say that our April meeting, is that what you're telling me to do?
So for our May meeting, I would love for the schools to be highlighted. So for our SPC reps, if you guys can create a slide, just telling us, something about your school, and that'll just kind of be how we end the school year. And then I guess we'll tell you where to send them, and so.
Yes, just a heads up on that, because that's what we did last May. Every school shared a highlight of the year, and then we did a compilation, and that was our May meeting. Our April meeting is going to be focused on testing, and so it's Dr. Guerin as well as Cindy Bachna to talk about all the standardized testing they take. High school, they take ACT, SAT. It's very confusing, and a lot of stuff has changed this year. So it's just a breakdown of what goes on. And then did you come up with that website that you wanted to share? Okay, did you want to say it out loud for everyone here? So she had asked about a website. So so Refugee Connection Phoenix is a Facebook group that someone was asking if there's a way for people to assist with donations. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you so much, everyone, for your time this morning.